Hi everyone, welcome back to So Arizona. I wanted to pop on here because southern Arizona is actually getting some pretty cold temperatures over the next week. And as I was checking the weather forecast for my area, which is in zone 8B, I saw that we are actually forecasted to get a temperature tonight, which is Thursday, of about 29 degrees, and it will be in the very low 30s, mainly 31, 32, even 30 on the following nights after that for a few days. So I am actually out preparing my garden to make sure that my plants are protected from frost, and I wanted to go over a few different ways that I protect my plants from cold so that I can keep them safe and growing when we get these cold snaps, and I thought that would be helpful for you. So let's go through those right now. The best place to start with this is understanding which plants actually need protection, because not all plants do. There are quite a few plants in our gardens, whether they be flowers or vegetables, that can withstand very cold temperatures. But then there are some that are not as resilient when it comes to freezes. So the first group is the tender annuals. And for vegetables, those are going to be things like your warm season vegetables like tomatoes and cucumbers, peppers, melons, squash, things like that. So anything that you grow when it is warm and summertime. That might seem a little strange to worry about right now when we are in early January, but I actually have tomatoes growing outside in my garden right now. But at this point, I am willing to part ways with them because I need the space for something else, and they have done their time in the garden and provided me with a lot of produce, so I am not going to cover those kinds of tender annuals in my garden. The next group of tender annuals will be our flowers. So those are things like coleus and begonias and verbena and nasturtiums and marigolds and things like that. So if you have flowers growing in your garden and you're not sure whether those are going to be tender annuals or something in between, then you might want to do a quick web search or check with whatever seed company that you got your flowers or your seeds from, and I'm sure that they have some guidelines for what optimal growing temperatures those varieties grow at. So all of those tender annuals from the vegetable and flower group I just mentioned are going to need protection when the temperatures are at or below 32 degrees. The next group of plants that may need protection at certain temperatures are the semi-hardy annuals, and those are going to be vegetables like lettuce or endive or chicory or Swiss chard, things like that. Flowers that are semi-hardy will include things like straw flowers and forget-me-nots and many more. Obviously, I can't provide a complete list of all of the annuals that will need protection, so whatever you have growing in your garden, if you're not sure, just make sure you do a quick search on the web to find out what their optimal growing temperature ranges are. Moving on to the hardy annuals, those are going to be the real troopers of the winter garden. And when it comes to the vegetable varieties, those are going to be things like kale and spinach and peas and onions and so many more. I've actually seen cabbage listed as a semi-hardy annual, and I think that that really depends on what zone you're growing in. I have actually come out into my garden in the morning and found my cabbage plants frozen solid and thought that they were lost. And then I came out a few hours later once the sun came up, and they had thawed out and they were none the worse for the wear. So I think that it really depends on your zone as well as the varieties that you're using. Hardy flowers in the garden would be things like pansies and calendula and foxglove and larkspur and many other things like that. So I have got a lot of calendula growing in the garden as well as pansies and some other things from that group. Cornflowers is another one, or bachelor's buttons, and those have really made it through quite a few very cold nights for me. So when you're preparing your garden for cold temperatures or a hard freeze, it's really helpful to know which plants really need your help and which ones you can let fend for yourself, because it is a lot of work to prepare our gardens for a hard frost. In my stock tank garden, I have got things like this beautiful kale bed behind me, and that is going to be just fine left out in the open. But then I have other things like these beautiful nasturtiums, and those are definitely fair weather friends and will need my help. Now that we've talked about the plants that need our help, let's talk about how we can help them and some of the methods that will work for protecting them during the hard freezes that are coming up. The first method for protecting your plants from cold is incredibly simple, and that is just to water them. And that's because of water's ability to absorb and hold heat. That is something called high specific heat, and it is a really useful tool in protecting our gardens from hard freezes. So as water cools down during the night, as the temperature falls, it will release heat, and it will release humidity as well, and that is going to warm the area directly around the roots, directly around the base of the plants, and it's going to add a layer of protection. So just watering your plants at the base, not at the leaf canopy, is going to be very protective. As you water the base of your plants, all of those air pockets within the soil are going to be moistened and be full of water, which is going to release heat during the night and protect your plants. It is important to water your plants at the right time before a freeze. So in my area, I'm going to be getting a freeze tonight. So I will be watering this morning, and that way the soil has a chance to absorb all of that moisture, and the water in the soil then will have a chance to absorb the heat of the day, and then that heat will be released during the night and early morning as the water cools down. All right, so let's move on to the next method, which is covering your plants. As you can see behind me, I have already gotten a head start on protecting some of my plants from the upcoming freeze, and that is by covering them with frost cloth. Now, if you have frost cloth, or if you have to purchase frost cloth, the good news is that you can use it again and again, season after season, as long as you fold it up and store it away carefully so that it doesn't get damaged by the sun or the wind by laying around in your garden when it doesn't need to be out. And this frost cloth is probably on its third year, and I just keep using it and then putting it away in my shed, and it works perfectly. There are different weights of the fabric. You can get a lighter weight or you can get a heavier weight, depending on what zone you're in and what needs you have, you know, how cold it gets in your area. So check with the company that you're ordering from. I bought mine this time from Bootstrap Farmer, and I will leave the link down below for that, and they have different weights of fabric for your needs, just as I said. If you don't have frost cloth, it's okay. You could use old bed sheets, you could use blankets, you could even use towels, just as long as they're not too heavy and they don't crush your plants. The important thing is to provide some kind of a support. I've got some hoops that I use from Johnny's that I've shared many times before, but in case you missed those, I will leave the link for those below. Those are hoops that are very bendable wires that I can move about throughout my garden, and they work for shade cloth or frost cloth or insect netting, just pretty much anything, and so they're very versatile. The reason why I need to provide support, whether it be stakes or hoops or baskets or whatever you've got on hand, is because of the way heat and cold is transferred. You don't want the frost cloth or the sheet to be in direct contact with your plants, because that cold can be transferred and the plant areas that are touching that fabric or that cloth can be damaged. Conduction is one way that heat can be transferred, and you can think of that as when you're holding a mug of coffee and the heat of that coffee is moving from the coffee through the ceramic mug and into your hands, or a bowl of soup or something like that. And that is exactly how temperature moves between the air, the fabric, and the plant. So if the air is below freezing and you've got the fabric touching your plant, then that temperature is going to move through that material and it's going to damage your plant. Another way that the cover that you choose is going to protect your plant is by blocking the wind, and that has to do with another way that heat is transferred, heat or cold in this case, and that is through convection. And you can think of that as wind. So if you have very drying wind, very hot wind, or very cold wind, you want to protect your plant from that by covering it or providing some kind of barrier for it. And then the next way is radiation, and you can think of that as like the radiation of the sun. How the sun heats up different materials is an example of radiation. So if you have ever solarized Bermuda grass or tried to kill weeds by covering it with plastic or with a tarp, then you are using the power of radiation there. So that all is an explanation for why you want to provide supports for your cover, whether it be a frost cloth, a blanket, a towel, an old sheet, because you want to prevent the transfer of energy from the ambient temperature of the air to your plant. There is one other type of fabric that I will use in my garden, and I need to provide an explanation for this because it doesn't exactly work the same way as other frost covers or sheets or blankets or whatever you're going to be using in your garden. And this is burlap. So I've got this roll of burlap here. I've got quite a few rolls that I use throughout different seasons that I explain in different videos. I do it for shade cloth, I do it for seed germination to protect it from the birds, and I use it as a frost protection. However, burlap is full of holes, and so it is a very well ventilated fabric. And so if you're looking for a fabric or a material that is going to completely block the cold air, burlap is not the fabric for you. What burlap will do is it will block freezing winds. Remember, we talked about the effect of wind when it comes to temperature. And also, if you want to add a little bit of protection to block your trees, you can kind of step up the protection by layering it. So when I wrap my trees, I will use several layers of it. So I will just wind and wind and wind this fabric around until I have 3 or 4 layers, and then it will definitely block the wind that way, but I'm still not relying on necessarily the insulating properties of burlap. I find that blankets and row covers or frost covers and bed sheets and things like that will do a little bit better. Now, I will say when it comes to frost covers versus bed sheets, you're going to get added protection from a frost cover than you will from a bed sheet because of the nature of the material. And like I said before, different companies will sell varying weights of fabric for your frost cover depending on what zone you're in. So just keep that in mind if you're thinking about using burlap. It's great for blocking wind, it's lightweight, it's breathable, but it's not as insulating as some other materials that you might choose. If you're using any kind of fabric to cover your plants, you want to make sure that you take that fabric all the way to the ground. This is for row covers, for frost covers, for burlap, for an old bed sheet or anything. You want to cover it completely to the ground. Don't just wrap the canopy of the tree and then leave the trunk out, because as the water that you provided to the base of the plant cools and it starts releasing heat and humidity, you want that canopy of the fabric to keep that inside against the plant. You also want to be able to provide insulation for the entire plant and not just the upper part of the plant, because the entire plant does need protection. If you're using frost cloth or burlap that is very breathable, then you can actually keep that on your plants all the time over the next few weeks, because it should allow enough light penetration and it will not trap enough heat to cook your plants. But if you're using a blanket or a towel or some other form of fabric, or even those plastic or glass cloches, you want to remove those during the day if daytime temperatures are going to be above 50 degrees, because you'll essentially be creating a mini greenhouse, and you could either cook the plants or you could trick perennial plants into coming out of dormancy and then sprouting too soon, which will make them much more susceptible to cold damage over the next few weeks as we get our colder temperatures. So if you're using the row covers or the burlap, you can keep it on. If you're using something else less breathable, take it off during the day. The last method I want to talk about is using a cloche, and it looks like this. So cloches can be plastic or they can be glass, and they are a solid surface covering that you can simply place over individual plants. The ones that I am using are plastic. They've got little ventilation holes on the top that I can open or close if I want to. You simply place the cloche over the plant. Now I will caution you that if it heats up during the day, the temperature is going to get quite warm underneath that cloche, so you will want to take it off during the day and then put it back on at night. These cloches have little perforations in the bottom of them so that I can put a landscaping pin through them to keep them from blowing away when it's windy, which is really nice because otherwise these are too lightweight. The glass ones are much heavier, so you don't need to do that, but with the plastic ones, if you're using those, you definitely need to provide some way to secure them to the ground so they aren't being blown away by the wind. I'm putting these over my potatoes because potatoes here at least have suffered quite a bit of frost damage in past years, so I've seen them on the semi and even on the hardy annual list, but I don't agree, at least not for my area. They have definitely gotten frost damage and even almost gotten completely killed, at least on the surface of the soil. And they did come back, but it killed all of the foliage on my potatoes last year when I had a freeze in my yard. So I am going to be putting cloches over my potatoes because I just have a few right now that are up and sprouted and leafed out, so I want to provide protection for them. Vegetables that are out in my garden that I am going to say goodbye to are the last of the tomatoes. So as I am covering some of the things that need to be covered, I'm also going to be harvesting the last of the tomatoes that are actually still ripening, surprisingly, so that I can take them in the house and process them. And then once that is finished, then I have to say goodbye to tomatoes for a few months until I can plant my seedlings out in late February and then hopefully be getting some harvests by April or May. Plants that I am not going to cover that should do just fine are the broccoli, the Brussels sprouts, the cabbage, the onions, the garlic. So I have quite a few things that I will not be covering that will continue growing throughout the winter time. I do have a couple rows of lettuce, and lettuce is a little tricky. Sometimes, depending on the variety, it's actually pretty hardy to freeze, and other times it can be killed by a frost. So it really depends on your area, your microclimate in your garden, and the variety that you're growing. But since I am cherishing that freshly harvested lettuce every day, I'm not going to risk it, and so I'm going to be covering mine just to make sure that I can keep making those salads for the next few weeks to come. I've been harvesting all of that lettuce using the cut and come again method, so some of the plants probably look pretty small, but they have been so productive. You all know I've got quite a few fruit trees in my garden, so you may be wondering which ones are going to be okay out when it's about 30 degrees and which ones are not and need to be covered. So I want to go through that really quickly. And the first variety that I want to talk about are the figs. So the figs that I have, the varieties that I've chosen, are generally fairly cold tolerant. I have quite a few mature trees that have done really well through past winters. However, there is one larger tree that froze all the way back to the ground and then rebounded amazingly, and that is my Oro Blanco fig. So I'm going to be wrapping that for sure, just to give some extra protection, even though it's a bigger tree. The other bigger trees, I am not going to be wrapping because they all did really well. But I do have quite a few small trees, very young trees that are not very well established, that I'm going to be adding protection over. Even though those are a more cold hardy variety, they just haven't been in the ground long enough for me to feel comfortable with letting them take care of themselves. So I'll be covering those. Another variety that I am going to be covering is my little purple possum passion vine, and that is because I just planted this probably two and a half months ago. It says on the tag that it is good down to 10 degrees, but I just don't trust it because I grew this variety a couple seasons ago and it froze back completely and died during the winter. Now, I will be fair and say that it was in a raised bed, so I think the roots are probably going to be a lot more insulated since they're underground with this one. But just in case, because it's not a very well established plant yet, I am going to go go ahead and cover it just to make sure, because I don't want to lose another one. I've got two other trees over here on the same side with a passion vine. One is my plum tree right here. And the other one is my pear, and I will not be covering these. There's my little pear tree. These trees have been growing for 3 seasons now. It's a Kiefer pear and a Santa Rosa plum. Those are supposed to be really good for southern Arizona, and they have done really well without any added protection throughout every winter that they've been here so far. So I'm going to just let them take care of themselves. There is just no need to create more work. I already have enough that I need to cover. So let's go check out some of the other ones that I will be covering. This fall I added a few more trees, because don't you always need more? One is this Katy apricot tree. And this Katy apricot is probably 2 to 3 years old, I would bet. I got it actually from a local nursery, and it's a fairly good size, but it's only been in the ground since the fall. So I just want to make sure that it is protected. I want to give it a little extra pampering since it's its first season. I also have a nectarine over in the back that I'm going to be covering as well. And then I've got a whole bunch of trees on this other side that I will not be covering, and those are the pomegranate trees. I have my espalier apple trees. Espalier is just a method of pruning so that you can grow them against a wall or a fence, which is really space efficient. And I also have my desert gold peach. So the apples are a Dorset gold and an Anna's. I've got 2 Anna's and a Dorset gold. So those are going to be really cold tolerant. And then I have a variety of different pomegranates that are great for this area. I've got a white Sonoran, I've got a ruby, I have a Josephina. What else do I have? A wonderful. I've got a couple of others too, but I can't remember right now. But those pomegranates are really good both in the heat and in the cold. So I am not going to be covering those either. The last thing that I will be doing as I am covering everything and prepping everything is running my irrigation system. Now I have my irrigation on several timers throughout the garden, and so those just auto water a couple times a week depending on the time of year. But I'm going to go ahead and start a manual watering session just so that I can deeply water everything. I can make sure that all of that soil is very nice and moist for the upcoming few nights that are going to be freezing. And then once that's finished, then I'm going to be taking those timers off and taking them inside. These are rain bird timers that I got from Home Depot, and so they're not a professional type of timer at all. They're just something that we bought and installed ourselves. And last season I actually lost a couple of them because I failed to bring them in when the temperatures got below freezing. Those timers have water in them. The water froze and expanded, and they ruined the timer. So I definitely don't want to have to replace those again because they're about 50 bucks each. So that was not very fun. So once I get everything prepped, hopefully the watering will be done, and then I can remove those timers, and I should be good to go and have everything tucked in and ready to withstand quite a few nights of freezing temperatures. I hope all of this helps you with knowing what you need to do and how you can do it and why, so that you can get all of your plant babies all safe and secure for the upcoming freezing temperatures that we're going to be getting. I'm Kara from So Arizona. Thank you so much for watching. Until next time, happy gardening.